far in this particular study that we're going into, as I was hoping. So we are going to have, Lord willing, including today, 3 more times in the book of Proverbs before we finish it up. So we'll meet this week and next week. Then I'll need to take a week off for some engagements that we have, and then we will return and finish up the book of Proverbs together. So this week, next week, then a week off, and then we'll reunite after that. But today we're in chapter 23. Last time we were together, we started in the first 3 verses that all go together. And those verses talk about going before the king and eating at the table and not being deceived by what it is that you're enjoying. Don't just gorge yourself on the delicacies that are in front of you. Now we're going to start with verse 4, and what we'll see a lot are pairs of verses that go together. A couple of statements that all form one complete thought, so we'll try for the most part to read those together and then discuss them after that. So starting in verse 4 of chapter 23, verse 4 and verse 5 go together. So do not tire in order to become rich. Out of your understanding may you desist. Your eyes will light on it, so that's the riches that you've accumulated for yourself, but there is nothing to it, for suddenly it makes for itself wings like an eagle, and it will be exhausted in the heavens. Here's the idea. Don't wear yourself out trying to get rich. Doesn't mean don't work hard. It means don't try to get rich. Don't accumulate money for money's sake, because before you know it, it's all gone. Instead, send your treasure ahead to heaven, where the moth does not destroy and the thief can never steal. Now, the New American Standard defines this thought very instructively here. When you look at 23:4, where it says, do not tire, the NASB puts it as cease from your consideration of it. It comes off very strong in that particular translation. Because when you set your eyes on it, and when you start to stare at it, it's gone. Now consider this particular instruction against the mountain of verses we have against being a sluggard, against being a lazy person. And now we have this admonition against overworking, because that's what it is. And we need to ask ourselves, then, what's the balance? Here's the balance. Don't worship your work. And don't worship your comfort. Don't worship your comfort so much that you're lazy, and don't worship your work so much that you overwork. Instead, worship God and allow God to guide you. And there's a difference between working hard, which we should all do, and overworking, and the difference is why you're working at all. Overworking is the pursuit of the most elusive dream, the dream of having enough, and you will never have enough. So don't set your expectations on money that are here today and gone tomorrow. Be wise with what God gives you, but always set your heart fully on Him. All right, continuing in chapter 23. Verse 6 through 8 all go together. And it kind of becomes an echo or a mirror image of the first 3 verses. So verse 6, do not eat the bread of the stingy, and do not desire his delicacies. For like hair in his throat, so it is. Eat and be drink, he will say to you. But his heart will not be with you. Your morsel you have eaten, you will vomit it up, and you will waste your pleasant works. Now, in verses 1 through 3, he talked about going before the king and not being deceived. What we have here now is another image of a difficult meal, and this one is the selfish person. He invites you to a meal. He says, no, go ahead and eat and drink, but you can tell he does not want you to do either. He is selfish with his delicacies. He doesn't want you to take what he's offering to you, and because of this heart against you, you reject what it is that you might receive. It's that idea of somebody saying, okay, well, here's a gift, but you can tell everything in their being they don't want to give it to you. And so what do you say? You know what, keep it. I don't want it. I don't want something if that's your heart when you give it to me. Verse 9. And the ears of a fool do not speak, for he will despise the wisdom of your words. Jesus puts this proverb this way in Matthew 7:6. Matthew 7:6. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine. Listen, it is our job to scatter seeds. We're to be sowers like the good sower, right? You scatter faithful seeds, and wherever it lands, it lands. But it's not your job then to go and find those seeds and to drive them down into the ground and make it accept it. Your job is just to scatter seed. God takes care of everything else. So don't sit there and argue with somebody who's a fool. They'll just despise the wisdom of your words. Now, verse 10 and 11 go together, but I'm going to break these out when we read them. So verse 10. Do not remove the ancient boundary marker. We've talked this so many times, over and over again. It's a very powerful refrain and exhortation. It's a warning. And on the fields of orphans, do not encroach. These are the ancient boundaries established by the Lord. Do not assume that your new ways or your desires are better than the ways of the Lord. And do not violate the portion of another, especially if they're vulnerable. Why? Verse 11. For their Redeemer is strong. This is why you don't mess with the boundary stone. You can't fool their Redeemer. He sees and knows what's going on. He himself will plead their cause against you. Now, 12, 13, and 14 all go together too. But 12 is going to be an instruction to the reader. So what he's going to do, he's going to talk to a parent. He's going to tell that parent in verse 12, apply your heart to instruction and your ear to sayings of knowledge. So you learn the ways of God. Then, verse 13 and 14, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you beat him with the rod, he will not die. As for you, with the rod you shall beat him, and his life you will save from Sheol. Now, here comes the sequence, right? You do what you're supposed to do. You learn what you're supposed to learn. You walk the way that you're supposed to walk. And don't keep it to yourself. Hand it down to your kids. Discipline your child. Spank your child if needed. You don't beat your child. You don't hurt your child. You don't abuse your child. But if you discipline him, they will not die. You'll go and you'll see. You'll spank them and they'll still live. But with their rod, you're trying to chasten them, right? Because you love them. You're trying to change this behavior. And ultimately, you're trying to save them from Sheol, from hell, from a life of damnation. And this is why we're called to do this, because you are playing for eternal stakes. You're not playing for the feelings of the moment, whether they like you or not. That has nothing to do with anything. It is our responsibility to correct them, because if we do not, the child will run headlong to their own instruction. Now, that is Solomon's instruction to the parent. You learn what you're supposed to do and pass them on to your kids. Starting in verse 15, we see a parent doing this. It seems to be a dad from the context that we'll get to later on. But starting in 15 all the way down to 28, if not 35, is a father speaking to their child, particularly to a son, as we'll see some of the temptations they talk about later on. But here's that dad talking. He listened to Solomon. He learned what he was supposed to say. Verse 15, my child, if your heart is wise, my heart will be glad, even me. Every parent wants to see their child follow the Lord with their whole heart. And Solomon didn't get this just out of anywhere. This is something he heard from his own father. 1 Chronicles 28:9. 1 Chronicles 28:9, David says this to Solomon, as for you, my son Solomon, know the God of your father, and serve him with a whole heart and a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every intent of thoughts. If you seek him, he will let you find him. But if you forsake him, he will reject you. Verse 16, the father keeps going. And my insides will rejoice when your lips speak what is upright. May your heart not envy the sinners, but live in fear of Yahweh all day. Now, this is Psalm 73 in Proverbs form. Because in Psalm 73, Asaph is struggling as he looks at people who are wicked and evildoers, and it seems like they're doing great. And he says this, he goes, I was envious of the boastful. My feet nearly slipped. When I saw their prosperity, I saw how their lives seemed to be easier than the righteous. Until I went into the sanctuary of God, then I understood their end. So this is what the dad is telling the kid. Listen, don't envy the riches or the seemingly ease of the unrighteous. For all that they have, they don't have the Lord, and to have the Lord is superior to all the riches of the world. But you, there's something different for you. Verse 18, for you, my child, there's a future and a hope, right? Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Verse 19, you, my child, hear and be wise, and direct your heart on the road, referring to that way, that highway of holiness they're supposed to walk. Verse 20 and 21, he keeps going. Now he's starting to talk about specific temptations, particularly for a child, and especially in context, Solomon speaking to the next king. So do not be among drinkers of wine, among gluttonous eaters of their meat. For the drunkard and gluttonous they will become poor, and with rags, drowsiness will clothe them. This is the idea of do not be ruled by your appetite. We saw this a bunch last week. But we need to understand the context of it. There is nothing inherently evil all by itself on alcohol. Paul is very clear on this. He goes, all things are good that were created by the Lord if they're received with thanksgiving. However, what's the context that Solomon puts it in? He puts it in the context of drunkard. He puts it in the context of gluttonous eaters of their meat. We'll talk about this more later on, but this is a person who numbs themselves out and becomes a slave to these particular substances. And this is the all-purpose danger of pursuing these things at all. Sometimes you just have to be safer and understand your appetites and put guardrails around your life to be protected. Verse 22, listen to your father, he who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Now, mom and dad are both inside of this at this moment. We're going to come back to this a little bit, but this starts the beginning of a refrain right here in 22. Buy truth, verse 23, and do not sell it. Wisdom and instruction and understanding. This is the echo of Proverbs 4:7. Proverbs 4:7. In all you're getting, get wisdom. In all that you acquire, acquire understanding. The dad uses the dad and the mom here to charge this child with this. Both your parents are asking you to do this thing. Verse 24, the father of the righteous will surely rejoice. Why? Because you went out there and you gathered wisdom. You gathered understanding. You bought truth and you did not sell it. The father of the righteous will surely rejoice. He who bears a wise person will be happy with him. Now here's the ending refrain, verse 25. May your father and your mother be glad, and may she who bore you rejoice. Why? What's between those two? You bought truth, you bought wisdom, and you didn't sell it. You held it close as something valuable to you. Verse 22 is a plea for the child to not ignore the parents. 25, the parents are rejoicing because the child has shown themselves wise. Now here in verse 26, it seems to still be dad talking to the kid. So now it's father to son. And it almost has the feel like the dad comes alongside the son and he kind of pulls him away from the mom a little bit that we saw in 25. And he goes, I need to speak to you man to man about something that you're going to face, your temptations. Verse 26, my child, may you give your heart to me. So pay attention to what I'm going to tell you. May your eyes delight in my ways. For a deep pit is a prostitute, and a narrow well is an adulteress. She is also like a robber lying in wait, and the faithless among mankind she increases. Now, starting in verse 29, this may be a new section, or maybe just a new topic, but the dad is still talking. But it's all going to go together, 29 all the way down to 35. And this time he starts talking about this temptation, people who lose themselves to substances. Verse 29, to whom is woe? To whom is sorrow? To whom are quarrels? To whom is complaint? To whom are wounds without cause? To whom is redness of the eyes? To those who linger over wine, to those who come to try mixed wine. So he's like, who's that person who's complaining? Who tries to drown their sorrows with wine and drink? They are those who seek solace in alcohol rather than the Lord. Now, what's so beautiful about this particular section is that the father that's speaking here is talking as one who has been on the inside of this. Because that's what we're going to see here in verse 31. Look at the way he describes it. Do not look at wine when it is red, when it sparkles on the cup, going down smoothly. Look at the way he talks about the seductiveness of it. But this isn't a person who's just drinking for the sake of the meal or whatever it might be, or all the other customary things that were going on in the culture at that particular time. We are talking specifically about those who go and find substances in order to numb themselves out, who go to find solace in the drink rather than in the Lord. And it gives you this promise, this beauty, this peace. But verse 32, in the end, it will bite like a serpent, and it will sting like an adder. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart will speak perverse things. And you will be like him who lies down in the midst of the sea, and like him who lies down on top of a mast. Look at how he describes this. Again, this is someone who's been on the inside. They understand what it's like to be this intoxicated. When you lie down in the middle of the sea, the idea is like you're lying down on the deck of the boat, but everything's moving around you. The whole sea is swirling around you. And then he goes, like the one who lies down on top of the mast. So if the boat's moving this much, if you go to the top of the mast is moving this much. And you go, the higher you go, the more everything's spinning around you. Verse 35, the drunk person says this, they struck me. I was not hurt. They beat me. I did not know it. When I will awake, I will continue. I will seek it again. The idea is that this person is woken up from the stupor, and their body is all beat up. He was like, I didn't feel anything. Just woke up with bruises. Woke up with marks all over. But when I awake, I will do what? I'll do it all over again. Because they're going from one escape to the next. When can I numb myself again to the pain? Chapter 24. Now, and these first 4 verses all go together, but it's 2 pairs of 2. 1 and 2, 3 and 4, but 1 through 4 all go together. So 1 and 2 tell us what to reject. He goes, reject this, right? This is the idea. Do not envy men of evil, and do not desire to be with them. For their minds will devise violence, and their lips will speak mischief. So stay away from that. But embrace this, verse 3. By wisdom, a house is built, and by understanding, it is established. And by knowledge, rooms are filled with all riches, precious and pleasant. So in verses 3 through 4, we have these triplets. This is how your house, your name, your family, your legacy, all those kind of things, this is how it's going to be established. By wisdom, it's built. By understanding, it's made permanent. And by knowledge, it's filled up. So wisdom builds, understanding establishes, and knowledge fills it up. Verse 5 and 6 now. The LEB is a little bit odd on this, but it's still a good translation for it. The warrior of wisdom is in strength. Little odd, but stay with me. And a man of knowledge is strong in power. For with wise guidance you shall make war for yourself, and victory is in an abundance of counsel. The idea here is that wisdom gives strength. Wisdom gives strength. So seek godly counsel, people who are righteous and seek the things of the Lord. It's an echo of Proverbs 15:22. 15:22. Verse 7. Wisdom is too high for fools. At the gate, he will not open his mouth. Now, the idea here is that they're at the city gates. This is where all the wise people of the town, all the men come together to discuss high-minded things while the women are actually doing all the work. So, fun in society. But when the fool comes here, they're talking about wisdom, and he's like, right over my head. It's too high for me. I don't get it. So they're just kind of quiet. They don't have anything to say. Verse 8. He who plans to do evil for himself, they will call him a master of mischief. Verse 9. Devising folly is a sin. Now, the idea of folly is the idea of nothingness, silliness, just foolishness. We're not talking about a kid. Now, earlier, Solomon's already told us, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, right? When they're kids, they're going to do all kinds of silly stuff, but a good spanking will drive it out of them, right? The rod will drive it from them. Here we're talking about an adult, because we were just in the city gate. He goes, aren't you a little too old to be thinking about stuff like this? At your age, thinking about things that do not edify, that are not constructive, is not a good thing. Devising folly, emptiness, silliness, nothingness is a sin. An abomination to humankind is a scoffer. That's a person who never has anything constructive to say. They want to tear everything down, but they don't want to help build things up. Verse 10. If you faint. Now you see that word faint there in the LEB. Now, depending on your translation, you may have all kinds of things going on here. It may say faint. It may say show yourself lacking courage. It may say slack, or if your strength is small. But the word here that's translated as slack means something that was tight that has started to cease, that has begun to desist, to become discouraged. So the idea is to lose heart and become limp, like a line that was tight, really tight, but over time it's just kind of become slack and begun to bow in the middle. That's the idea. So if you faint, on the day of adversity, little is your strength. What good is it when you're strong but things aren't hard? Everybody can be strong when the storm's not there. But the one that you can count on, the one who can actually do something, is the one who can outlast the storm. The idea here is don't give up. The race is almost over. Just don't give up. Jeremiah 12:5, if you have run with the footmen and they have wore you out, how are you going to keep up with the horses? Galatians 6:9, let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Verse 11 and 12, this is an important one. This is an important charge for the church. Rescue those who are led away to the death and those who staggered to the slaughter. If you hold back, if you say, look, we don't know this, does not he who weighs hearts perceive it? And he who keeps your soul, he knows, and will repay humankind according to his deeds. Now, as you look at both of these verses together, it tells us God's heart. His heart is to rescue the lost. He does not delight in the destruction of the wicked. How great is his heart to rescue those who are wrongfully oppressed, like this verse describes, who are being led to their deaths. They're being led to the slaughter, and we're to go and to try to rescue them and to pull them back. And we cannot claim we didn't know, because God knows what's really going on in our hearts. And that's what it says, right? He knows our hearts. He will repay us according to our work. So God sees. Don't be deceived. As the church, we are commanded, strengthen the weak places before they are lost. Revelation 3:2. But verse 12 has another very interesting, nuanced idea within it. And like all nuanced ideas, it is prone to abuse. But look at what Solomon says. Solomon tells us, if you say, we did not know this. Now, it could be that they're saying, we didn't know it, but we really did, and God knows, and he's going to get you. That could be it. But then he goes like this. He goes, doesn't God consider what you know when he weighs your heart? Here's the idea. Does he not know it who keeps your soul? Will he not render to you according to your work? By itself, this one verse has a very interesting idea in it. God judges us according to the revelation he has given to us. It becomes an interesting response to those who go, well, what about those who are in the Amazon or in the deepest, darkest part of Africa, and they've never heard the name of Jesus? Are they going to hell too? God is a righteous judge. He will judge them according to the revelation that he has given them. And the bottom line is that the name of Jesus is not that mechanism that saves you. Like if you say that, then you're good. And all the people before Jesus, well, they're just going to go to hell. Because how was Abraham saved? By grace through faith. Period. That is how everybody is saved. That's why Romans 1 says there is nobody that has a valid excuse, because even creation itself declares the invisible attributes of God. He has given everybody at least a baseline of revelation, and he will judge all of us according to the revelation that he has given us. Verse 13 and 14. My child, eat honey, for it is good, and the dripping of the honeycomb is sweet to your taste. So honey's good. You need to eat it. It's good for you. Just like honey, though, thus know wisdom for the sake of your soul. Because just like honey is good for the body, wisdom is good for your soul. If you find it, then there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. 15 and 16. Do not lie in wait like an outlaw against the home of the righteous. Do not do violence to his dwelling place. For 7 times the righteous will fall, but he will rise. But the wicked will be overthrown by calamity. You can attack the righteous, and you might even knock them down. But God will keep raising them up. But you who are wicked, who are going out like an outlaw against the house of the righteous, God is going to bring you down, and you will be overthrown. 17 and 18. While your enemies are falling, do not, and what's that word? Rejoice. Do not rejoice. Now, this is a hard one for us. Because when we see someone that we deem as wicked and we see like they're getting what they deserve, a part of us is like, yeah, finally, all right. And God goes, do not rejoice. When he trips himself, may your heart not be glad, lest Yahweh see and it be evil in his eyes and turn his anger away from him. Do not rejoice when the wicked fall. You need to be broken for them. They're lost. This is what God says to Edom in Obadiah chapter 1. Obadiah chapter 1. Do not gloat over your brother's day when Israel is judged, the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the sons of Judah in the day of their destruction. Do not boast in the day of their distress. For the day of the Lord draws near to on all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Jesus tells us this. Be very careful when you start judging people, because the measure you use will be used against you. And if you judge with grace and mercy and weeping, that is how God will judge you. But if you judge with self-righteousness, then guess what's coming towards you? Without mercy, with crassness, with cruelty, guess what's coming back to you? Do not rejoice when they stumble. Instead, going back to verse 12, reach out and deliver them from death. 19 and 20. Do not fret because of the evildoers. Do not envy the wicked. So we have this ongoing echo coming out of what we just saw. For there will not be a future for the evil. The lamp of the wicked will die out. And we'll keep seeing this refrain. Don't worry about the wicked. God will take care of them. You take care of you. 21 and 22. Instead of fretting about the evildoers and laughing when they get what they got coming to them, verse 21, fear Yahweh, my son and the king. With those who change, do not associate. For suddenly their disaster will come, and the ruin of both of them, who knows? He says, don't be blown about. Don't let every new thing that comes into your life shake you this way or shake you that way. New wind of doctrine, oh, I'm going to go be about this. Something bad in my life, oh, I'm going to go and resist that. He says this, just be stable. Just fear the Lord. Just be where you're supposed to be. God will keep you moored in place. He will keep you safe. And we need to beware of those people who change their mind every time the wind blows. Now, 23 starts a new section, right? We just finished up the sayings of the wise. Verse 23, we have the next section. More sayings of the wise. Verse 23 through 26 all go together. These sayings are also for the wise. So that's our chapter heading, right? Partiality in judgment is not good. Whoever says to the guilty, you are righteous, the people will curse him. The nations will abhor him. But they who rebuke will have delight. So they're rebuking the wicked. And upon them, the ones who are doing the rebuking, blessings of goodness will come. He will kiss the lips, he who gives an honest answer. Isaiah 5:20. Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Instead, the righteous delight in the one who gives a right answer. This is why he says he will kiss the lips. The idea is of this greeting towards them, and in that culture, this idea wasn't that jarring for them. They wouldn't have thought much of it. If you go and you kiss somebody on the cheeks or kiss them on the side of the mouth, what you're doing is you're receiving them and embracing them. Verse 27. Prepare your work in the street and get it ready for yourself in the field. Afterward, then you shall build your house. Now, it's an interesting one. You have to put it in agrarian terms for us to kind of understand. But here's the root heart of this particular proverb. Don't put the cart before the horse. Don't put the cart before the horse. Take care of first things first. Get your food and income all handled. Then go worry about building up the house. All right? Build up your family coming out of that. But don't go build the house and go, okay, now I got to get my work stuff ready. No. Go get the work stuff ready. Get that thing going. Make sure that everything's planted, and then get the house built up. 28 and 29. Do not be a witness without cause against your neighbor, nor deceive with your lips. Now, we look at them like, of course, I don't need to be a bad witness. But here's the thing, verse 29. Do not say, just as he has done to me. Now it starts to come into face. This is revenge. They did something bad to you first. Fine, I'll do the same bad thing to you, right? Eye for an eye. That's what we're told, isn't it? But he says, do not say, just as he has done to me, so shall I do to him. I will pay back the man according to his deed. We've seen this over and over again. Leave vengeance to the Lord. Even if your neighbor did you evil, repay their evil with good. As Paul wrote in Romans 12:19, never take your own revenge, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. 30 through 34 is another section. Now, this one is going to be an observation/parable, right? Solomon gives us the scenario. I passed by the field of a lazy person and over the vineyard of a person lacking sense. Now, we might walk by it and go, man, they need to get to work. That thing looks terrible, and just keep on their way. But this is Solomon. So he stops and he goes, what can I learn from this situation? Verse 31, he keeps describing, and behold, it was overgrown. All of it was covered with thorns. Its surface with nettles and its stone walls was broken down. Then I myself saw, and my heart considered. So he's examining, what can I learn? What can I learn from their mistakes? I look and I took hold of instruction, and here's the lesson. Verse 33, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands for rest. Oh, I've been working so hard, I just need a break. You know what? I really need some me time. I need some time just to decompress and to be by myself. Yeah, sure, you can do that. A little sleep, a little slumber, but that starts to lead to more and more. You never need less me time. You decide to take more me time because that me time was so good for me. But what happens? Verse 34, and your poverty will come running, and your lack like an armed warrior. I just need a little nap. I just need a little break. But here comes all the negative consequences coming because hard work works. Chapter 25. There are also Proverbs of Solomon with officials of Hezekiah, which officials of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. Here's the next section. Chapter 25, this section will go all the way through chapter 29. It's a large, large section. The idea almost seems to be that the first several chapters and the last couple of chapters were already established and collected. But after the revival of Hezekiah and the things that were going on, this first major revival that just spread through the land, Hezekiah being one of the best kings they ever had, the things they faced against the Assyrians, and they were like, we need more of the Proverbs. And that's what we're going to see because there's a sort of kind of tonal shift inside of these chapters. There will be more focus about wickedness and things that affect Israel on a national scale, especially involving leaders. It may be because it's due to the revival that occurred under Hezekiah, or it could just be me seeing this in there, and that's not it. But regardless, the people seem to be, or the atmosphere seems to be more sensitive to refuting and refusing sin and pressing in towards God, which is why we will see more of the Proverbs about kings and rulers in this section. All right, so verse 2. The glory of God conceals things, but the glory of kings searches out things. This may be my favorite proverb, because this proverb taught me what Proverbs could actually be. Prior to it, Proverbs were great. Sometimes they fit you. I couldn't remember a bunch of them. But they had more of a fortune cookie vibe to them. You break one open, here's your proverb for the day, and you kept it moving. And then you get to one like this, and you're like, I don't know what it means. I'm listening to a teaching by Pastor Damien Kyle out at CC Modesto. And he was talking about something totally different than this. But he brings up this proverb, and he goes, this is the idea of the proverb. It's like if you're a parent and you're trying to teach your child something, and you want them to discover it. You don't want to just tell them everything because they're not going to get it. And as you're walking them through step by step, as they're discovering this thing, that moment when it just clicks in their head, and their face just explodes in sunshine and happiness, and they're like, I get it. Look at this, Dad. Do you understand what this is? And your heart is so joyful because they have discovered what you were hoping that they would see. That's the idea of the proverb. That God has hidden things in this world for us to go and discover. They're all in plain view. The mysteries and secrets are all there for us. But he has hidden them there. He's concealed them so that we could go and search them out. And if we're discussing or discovering this thing about science and that thing about biology and this thing about our lives, God rejoices because there is joy to discovery. That's why learning is so much fun. Verse 3. As heaven is to height and the earth is to depth, so is the heart of kings. There is no searching. So this is SAT format, right? As the heavens are for height and the earth is for depth. We're like, well, what does that mean? How far it can go? Yeah, sort of. But then he goes, and so is the heart of kings. And we're like, well, that's not like the other ones. But this is the idea. You can't search the fullness of any of them. We can't know of everything that is in the heavens, nor can we search all of the earth out, nor can you know the fullness of what it is that the king is going through. And there's all kinds of applications for this, but one that is really interesting is that you can't know the fullness of what that particular leader is going through. Because there are aspects to it, burdens that they have upon their heart, that unless you're in that position, you will not know. There's an unsearchableness to this, the things that they are going through. Verse 4 and 5 go together. Again, we have this idea. He's going to paint a picture, and then he's going to apply it to the second one. So verse 4, remove dross from silver, and it will become a vessel for the smith. So we talked about in this past. If you're going to remove the impurities, you go and you heat up the silver. You put it inside a crucible, you get it super hot, and you bring it out, and the dross will separate from the silver, and it'll kind of form a film on the top. So you spoon as much of it away as you can without getting into the silver, and then you put it back. And then you do this over and over again, spooning out the dross, removing it until it's pure enough that a smith can make something with it. Now that's the idea. Then verse 5 hits. Remove the wicked before a king. It's the same idea. You're removing the impurities from it. You can't do anything with the king as long as the wickedness stays there. The wickedness in advisors and people around him, and even the wickedness in his own heart. But if you remove the wicked before a king, his throne will be established in righteousness. It can finally be used for what it is that God wants to do. Verse 6 and 7. Do not promote yourself before the king, and in the place of the great ones, do not stand. For it is better that he say to you, ascend here, than he humble you before a noble, what or who your eyes have seen. And I'll get into why I said that here in just a second. All right, here's the idea. Jesus tells us in Luke 14, you get invited to a feast, and you show up. Don't go take the best seat for yourself, because then you're going to be embarrassed. Everyone else is going to come in, and they're going to go, you can't sit in that seat, and the only seat left to you is the one all the way at the very end. Instead, it's better to kind of come in humbly and sit near the back. You can't get kicked out of your seat. And the best or the worst thing that can happen is the guy comes to you and goes, my friend, what are you doing sitting here in the back? No. Come up here to a higher place, and I will elevate you in the eyes of everyone. And now you get pushed in front of other people, and they all have to scoot down to make room for you. Here's this idea in the proverb where the guy kind of comes in, and he elbows his way into the crowd. Everyone take notice of me. And then somebody goes, you need to go sit down. You can't hang out with us. You're not cool enough. That's the idea within the proverb. Verse 8. Verse 8 through 10 is one continuous proverb. But now I mentioned this thing at the end of verse 7 about this, what your eyes have seen. Here's the difficulty of this particular word at the beginning of that little clause, what your eyes have seen. It can mean what, or it can mean who. And we're like, okay, so what your eyes have seen, or who your eyes have seen, who is it talking about, and why is the verse there? The idea could be that it goes to the one above it, where it's talking about the noble that you've been embarrassed in front of, that who your eyes have seen. Or, maybe more likely, what your eyes have seen is talking about what we see in verse 8. See right there? Do not bring it out hastily in court for what you will do at its end when your neighbor puts you to shame. Here's the idea, that what you have seen is the idea that you have seen a secret of somebody or something that embarrasses them. And he goes, whatever it is that you know about that person, don't put them on blast in front of the court. Don't spread it out, all this gossip all over the place, because guess what? You got secrets of your own, and your neighbor knows them. And you start blabbing about other people, then your neighbor's going to start blabbing about you. And the next thing you know, you're the one being embarrassed when you are going and gossiping about someone else. Instead, verse 9, argue your argument with your neighbor himself. So do it off to the side. The secret of another, do not disclose. Just because you know something about them, don't say it, lest he who hears shames you. And your ill repute will not end. It is an ongoing idea. You hold their secrets like they're your secrets. If somebody confides in you, they trust you. Don't trust your secrets with somebody that doesn't value your heart. Discuss the matter in private. Do not gossip. Don't complain to everyone about a matter lest you end up being the one who's wrong and your reputation is the one that has suffered. Verse 11. Apples of gold in a setting of silver. This is beautiful jewelry, fitting to be in the presence of the king, right? Is a matter spoken at its proper time. This is Proverbs 15:23. Proverbs 15:23. Praise God for the right word at the right time. We heard this before, right? Only a fool says everything that's on their mind as soon as they say it. You give them a matter and they immediately have a comment. But the wise person does what? They think about it. We'll see this later on. Don't be in a rush to discuss everything right when it comes up. We'll see it in Proverbs 29:20. When you hear something, stop, think. Be willing to wait before declaring your thoughts. Verse 12. A ring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a rebuke of the wise to the ear of a listener. If you correct a wise person, they will hold it like something valuable. Verse 13. Like the cold of snow on a day of harvest. Now we look at that and we're like, that doesn't make sense, because it sounds like that would hurt the crops. It's kind of not unfortunate, but it's a very rigid translation. When it says the cold of snow, the idea is more like a cool breeze on a hot day. When you're out there working in the field and you're just so hot, but a nice gentle breeze blows through and it cools the temperature down, it's like, oh, this is the best blessing. Like the cold of snow on a day of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him, and the soul of his master is refreshed. Now this harmonizes with 25:25 that we'll see in a second. This is what we're called to be. We're called to be faithful messengers of the gospel. And what we'll see in 25 is that we should be a refreshment to the people we bring the message to. But if we are faithful, we will be a blessing to the one who sent us. And the one who sent us is our master. Verse 14. Like clouds and wind when there is no rain, so too is a man who boasts in a gift of deception. Now this forms a contrast to verse 13. Verse 13 is the faithful messenger. But again, this is one of those things that you understand when you're in Israel and you understand how dry the land is and how desperately they need the early and latter rains. And if you don't get rain in one of those sections, everything suffers. All the land suffers. So if it looks like rain is coming, the clouds are big and everything's all boisterous and you're like, oh, this is exciting, rain's coming, but then not a drop falls, it just lets your heart down. It's like, what was all that about? That's what we see here. Like a cloud like that, when wind that's blowing but doesn't bring rain, is like a man who boasts in a gift of deception. That's nothing to brag about. Verse 15. With patience, a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone. The idea here is of being soft, patient, and gentle. Now, a little immature kid is just going to throw a tantrum when they don't get what they want. And when you see a little kid throwing a tantrum, are you more likely to give in to them or less likely? Well, if you're like me, you're significantly less likely. Whatever it is you want, you're not getting now. I don't care how much you want it. But if that one is patient, all right, I can wait. I can be soft. Then even the ruler over the entire land, you can break them down. A soft tongue can break a bone. The idea is to bear with difficulty until you outlast it. Forbearance is a command of temper, restraint of passions. Don't lose your temper. All you do is make them more resistant to you. Verse 16. If you find honey, eat what is sufficient for you. Here we have a warning against gluttony. Don't have it until you can't eat any more of it, right? Lest you have your fill of it and vomit it out. Avoid overindulgence. Don't gorge yourself on what is pleasurable. We will see this repeated in verse 27. Verse 17. Don't make your foot scarce in the house of your neighbor, lest he become weary of you and hate you. Here's the proverb. Don't wear out your welcome. Don't make it when they see you come and they'll go, all right, turn out the lights. Let's pretend we're not home because we don't want to deal with them. Verse 18. Like a club and a sword and a sharp arrow is a man who bears false witness against his neighbor. All he does is spread harm. Verse 19. A bad tooth and a lame foot is the trust of a faithless person in a time of trouble. So the idea is you have a bad tooth, but you go to bite into something. And as soon as it comes in contact with that bad tooth, it's just like, I can't do anything. Or a lame foot is you have a foot that's not working with the rest of your body, and you need it to be trustworthy, but you go to put your weight on it, and it just slips out from under you, and you fall down. This is the same idea as trusting a faithless person when all the chips are down, when it's a time of trouble. And you can't trust them because you know they're faithless, so all you're going to do during this entire time is just worry nonstop that they're going to let you down. So don't put your trust in them. Verse 20. Like one who removes a garment on a cold day, and like vinegar on natron. Now, this is a mineral that reacts with vinegar. So think Mentos and cola, right? You mix them together and it starts getting real fizzy and they react to each other. This is like one who sings songs to a heavy heart. So the idea here is sense the tone. Have enough sense to understand what it is that they're going through. Weep with those who weep. Mourn with those who mourn. Don't act like everything's just fine and laughing. Come on, buddy, get over it. When their heart is breaking. The idea is of singing light songs and songs of joy and ignoring the sorrow, trying to cover over it with bubbly joy. Doing so is unthoughtful and inconsiderate. 21 and 22 go together. If your enemy is hungry, feed him bread. And if thirsty, let him drink water. Now that all makes perfect sense. But now we're going to get to my biggest pet peeves in the Proverbs, right? Verse 22. For coals of fire you will heap upon his head, and Yahweh will reward you. Now here's my pet peeve. There are teachers significantly better than me that will totally disagree with what I'm about to tell you. And they will tell you that during this time, verse 22 is actually a gift. Because you don't want to have to start a fire all the time, or maybe it's going to take a while to get down to the bed of coals. So they come to your house and they borrow some coals, and you put it inside of a bucket, and they put the bucket on top of their head, and they go home, and they have coals. And none of that makes sense in the context. See, okay, let's say putting coals on top of their head is this exact idea. It's a blessing to them. It's doing something nice. So let's make it useful for our current day. If that is the correct idea of it, then it would read something like this. If your enemy is hungry, feed them. And if he is thirsty, give him something to drink. And by doing so, you would wash his car, and the Lord will reward you. And none of that makes sense. Now, I could scratch my nose one of two ways. I could do this. I could go all the way around my head and try to scratch my nose. The plain reading is most often the correct one. The idea is so much more straightforward. It will dump coals on their head when you do something nice, when they're your enemy and they just want to tear you apart. It burns them up because there's nothing they can do, even though they know that there's nothing you can do. I keep trying to be a jerk to them, and they keep being nice to me. And what it does is it causes them to smolder upon themselves until the coals burn out and there's nothing left. All the anger is gone. They burn themselves out. And because they burn themselves out, God will reward you. Verse 23. The wind of the north produces rain, and a backbiting tongue, so a gossiping tongue, someone who talks about you behind your back. What does it produce? Angry faces, because when you hear about it, you're going to be mad. Now, it just so happens that this is followed by 24. Better to live upon the corner of a roof than with a woman of contention and in a shared house. Now, I'm not saying the two are related, but one does follow the other, and I'm just pointing that out. Verse 25. Like cold water upon a weary soul, so too is good news from a distant place. The idea is that you've been waiting for a report of some event far away from you. We're all old enough to remember that the time when you had to literally wait by the phone, right? You couldn't have the phone by you. You had to sit there. You couldn't do anything on the off chance it might ring and you couldn't get to it. So you literally waited by the phone until this good news came. And when you got it, it freed you from that position. You could just run around with joy. You didn't have to be tethered to that place anymore. Verse 26. This is a big one. Like a muddied spring or a polluted fountain is the righteous who gives way before the wicked. Again, you understand this context when you're in Israel and you see how dry some of these areas are. So imagine being in a desert and you see a spring off in the distance. And so you start running for it. You're so excited. I'm going to have something to drink. Everything else is rocks. I don't know when I'm going to find the next spring. And you get to it and you go to take a drink from it and you realize that the spring is corrupted. It's polluted and it's not good for you. Think about what it would do to your heart, how it would just fall through the floor. All your hope is gone. This is the idea. If you're like this, you're like that polluted spring, and a person who's like this is one who compromises the truth. Because everything should be clean. The pond, the puddle should be nice and clear. You could drink water right out of it, but then somebody comes and they stop right in the middle of it, and the mud shoots all over it, and now none of it can be consumed. This is what happens. The righteous person who gives way before the wicked, they compromise. They let them have whatever it is that they want. You're good to nobody now. You're just like a muddied spring. 27 and 28. To eat much honey is not good. Remember, just enough. Nor is sinking one's honor honorable. This is a person who's trying to find their own praise, always hinting at a compliment. They're trying to get something. It's not good. Verse 28, a breached city where there is no wall is like a man who has no self-control for his spirit. These ideas go together. Without self-control, we're like a defenseless city. We go and we try to honor ourselves, but that simply is not good. So that's where we're going to end today, at the end of chapter 25. We'll pick up with 26 the next time we're together. We will take probably about half of the remaining chapters that we have in Proverbs, and then we'll finish up the rest of it after a couple weeks. So we'll meet next week, off 1 week, meet the week after that. So Heavenly Father, we love you.